Each year, as spring turns to summer and summer to fall, I get more and more excited about the upcoming Iowa archery season. Like many of you, I spend time shooting my bow, hanging trail cameras, scouting, and really just kind of strategizing about what my upcoming year might look like. And with that said, going into the 2012 season, I really didn't have that high of hopes. Most of my weekends were booked, and I just recently switched jobs, and so I went from having about 30 vacation days to just a handful. I was able to take November 7th, 8th, and 9th off, and so I was really looking forward to those 3 straight days of hunting. October seemed to absolutely fly by, and I was able to get out twice in mid-October and shoot a couple does. I finally teamed up with Matt Strayer for the very first time on October 28th for a quick evening hunt. We saw quite a few deer that evening. We had a couple nice bucks chasing a doe in the timber below us, and quite a few deer were coming out to feed. Just before sunset, we had a nice doe working her way towards us.
First kill for Strayer and I of the year, hopefully the first of many. October is coming to an end and November is near, and so I think things are going to start happening here pretty quick. Thanks to Matt Strayer. It's our first time hunting together this year. Hopefully this is the first of many deer to be put down this fall.
This experience made me even more excited to meet up with Matt Strayer for 3 straight days of hunting. I made the drive down to southeast Iowa on November 6th. After a quick night's rest, before I knew it, Matt Strayer and I were headed to a stand that I'd waited the whole entire year to hunt.
It's the morning of November 7th, and we still got quite a bit of time before first light, but we're gonna make our way into a really good spot. We sat here a few times last year and had a lot of good action, so we're pretty excited. Really good time of the year, weather's cool, pretty windy. The plan is to sit all day and hopefully get something down.
November 7th, 2012 turned out to be one of the most intense days of hunting that I've ever had. We saw several young deer the first couple hours after sunrise.
We've been in the stand for a little over 2 hours and had really good movement so far. Seen 3 or 4 bucks, quite a few does. It's a good sign.
Around mid-morning, we got busted by a really nice buck. And a short time later, a doe with a nice buck behind her was working our way. The doe walked by at about 50 yards, and the buck actually left her to chase off a couple smaller bucks. He finally came back to meet up with the doe, and I grunted at him, and he actually came charging in at us full speed, got to about 25 yards. Matt was trying to get on him with the camera, and for whatever reason, he turned completely around and walked off and met up with that doe. The area we were hunting was pretty thick, and Matt was having a hard time getting on him with the camera. The doe ended up bedding down, and not only was the big buck behind her, but 2 more big deer eventually worked their way in and were standing right on top of her, waiting for her to make a move. It was too thick to video, but Matt and I kept looking through our binos, not believing our eyes. There was 3 awesome bucks within 20 yards of each other on top of this doe, and all this was taking place maybe 80 yards away from our tree stand.
It's almost noon, and I think the last hour of hunting has been the most intense hour that I've had in a very long time.
After about 2 hours of this, the biggest buck actually claimed that doe, and they took off in the other direction. Smaller bucks kept coming in, kept trailing this doe, kept searching downwind, and there were deer around us all afternoon. We had action nonstop almost all day, and we were headed to the exact same stand the next morning.
It's 7:30, and we just had our first deer of the morning. It was a doe. Quite a ways off in the distance, wasn't anything behind her.
On November 8th, we saw quite a few deer as well, although most of the movement was over 100 yards away. In the afternoon, we had a nice doe bring a big buck, probably 75, 80 yards away from us. They ended up bedding down for a couple of hours. As the sun went down, rather than head our direction, they got up and walked directly away from us. November 9th was the last day of my vacation, and Matt Strayer was up to bat. We went to the same general area where he shot his really nice buck the year before.
Busted up on that side. Man, what a beautiful buck. This is awesome.
We didn't have a whole lot of action throughout the day, but we did have a really nice buck, one that we would have liked to take out of the herd, sneak up on us and walk 15 yards away from us before I could grab the camera and before Matt could grab his bow. He walked by at 15 yards, plenty of shot opportunities, but neither of us were ready and we had to just watch him walk by. As the sun was setting, we had a really nice buck behind the doe, but they took the adjacent ridge and went down to feed. This buck is a very, very old buck called Old Man 7. His rack isn't anything special, but this is a very mature deer that we would have loved to shoot. As it got dark, it was kind of bittersweet knowing that we had an absolutely amazing 3-day hunt, but at the same time, this was probably my last trip to Southeast Iowa, so I was leaving somewhat dejected, so to speak, knowing that probably wasn't going to happen this year. On November 16th, my family and I were sitting around the dinner table, and Matt Strayer gave me a call. He sounded pretty dejected and had said how he had a good morning, saw a lot of big deer, but then his cameraman had to climb down because of an emergency, and he was left to film himself that evening. Matt soon realized just how hard self-filming really is. He had a lot of deer in front of him, including one really, really nice 8-pointer. This deer was out in front of him for probably 10, 15 minutes and eventually walked by at about 25 yards. But because Matt was trying to film himself and get a shot, the deer walked away unharmed without an arrow being released. I felt really bad for him. If his cameraman would have been there or if I would have been there, that for sure would have been a dead deer. And I knew that I had to try and do all I could, rearrange my schedule to try and get down there and hunt with him the next morning. At about 9 o'clock that night, I packed my things up, headed down to Southeast Iowa, and met up with Matt for what was going to be our last day in the stand together for the entire year.
Time to go get a couple hours of sleep and hopefully have some action tomorrow morning.
The morning of the 17th was incredible as well. We saw quite a few deer up in the field above us. Couldn't really get any footage of them, but there were definitely some mature deer on their feet. Mid-morning, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, and I could not see the deer, but I saw this tree just getting absolutely worked over. A couple minutes later, I see movement, and Strayer tapped me on the shoulder and goes, "Big deer." Sure enough, we had an awesome 10-pointer walking right at us. He kind of angled away and stood at this small pond, took a drink for probably 10 minutes. This deer was maybe 30 yards away, but it just was not clear enough for Matt to get a shot. We were hopeful though because there was a pretty good-sized travel route that went right in front of our stands at 15 yards. But rather than following our plans, this buck kind of angled away and paralleled us at about 35 yards, and it was just too thick for Matt to get a shot. We climbed down around 1, went back, got a really quick lunch and headed out, and this was going to be my last chance to fill my AnySex tag for the year. We weren't exactly sure where to go, but I decided to go to kind of a travel corridor between two big fields, and I was hoping that just before dark a nice buck might come out and try to search for does, and if it all worked out, he might walk by and give me a shot. We had to cut a couple shooting lanes, and I remember getting there kind of late, and as I was cutting a shooting lane, we had a doe come out, and I just thought, man, this just is not meant to be for me this year. We had quite a few deer out in the fields above and below us, but so far, no mature deer.
Got the neighbor shooting his elephant gun next door.
Just before sunset, Matt tapped me on the shoulder and said there was a big buck up top. This deer was probably 300 yards away, but we could tell that it was the same 8-pointer that he had had the encounter with the night before. And he was up there busy running does, but then eventually walked off. About 10 minutes later, I looked in the lower field and there was a very nice buck making his way into the field. This is the buck that we call Old Man 7, the one that we had the encounter with a week or so before. And at that same time, Matt said there was a buck up top as well. So we have two bucks, one's up top, one's down low. Really the only way to meet is this travel corridor right in front of us. And so I just picked up my grunt tube and started grunting, hoping one or both of them would make their way to us.
Hey man, there's a doe out in front of you too.
The buck below us completely ignored me, but the one up top, even though he was probably a couple hundred yards away, turned and headed right for us.
That buck's coming this way, man. Yeah, he is. He's coming, man, he's coming.
Matt caught just the tail end of him as he was going down into a ravine in the field, and we lost him for probably a minute or two. Just then we saw tines come up over the hill, and he was headed right for us. As this deer was walking in, I knew there was a pretty good chance he might wind us, but there was also a small chance that I could get a shot off before that happened.
Right.
Listen. That was a good shot, wasn't it? Looked like it. Oh my gosh. I don't even know what to say. Good job. Matt's watching a nice buck up there that ended up coming down and offering me about a 20-yard shot. And there's another buck out in that field that we call Old Man 7 that we saw about a week ago. So I grunted, hopefully one of them would come in, and the one that Matt was watching came in, and I thought the wind was gonna bust us. I really couldn't see it until it got right in front of us because Matt was running the camera. That is awesome, way to go. We're down to about the last half hour of our hunting season, so to speak.
All right, well, we had to go back and get the camera light because it was starting to get dark, but this guy didn't go 75, 80 yards. We just had an awesome day today, had a great encounter this morning, and half hour before dark, this guy came in on a string. So it's been a few years since Matt and I have filmed a buck kill together, but we were able to pull it off tonight, and I can't thank him enough for the opportunity to come down and hunt his land and just enjoy his friendship. And this is just an awesome, awesome experience on November 17th.